Hi, welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Yeah. I'm Nicole Hosmer. I'm a teacher on special assignment in Poway Unified School District, and I focus on early childhood and behavior support.
And my name is Heather Green. I'm also a teacher on special assignment in Poway Unified with a focus on early childhood. Currently, Nicole and I support primarily our preschool, TK, kinder, and we're starting to dabble in first grade. So today we are diving into the CPTKLFs. So such a long acronym. They were revised just this last summer. So I'm sure in all your spare time you've been downloading the hundreds of pages of PDF and reading them. In case you
Mhm.
haven't gotten the opportunity to do that, today we're going to help you jump into how to use them, how to navigate them, what is really stands out about them, and what it looks like in terms of how they can drive your IEP and student supports.
Yep. So this is our agenda. We'll go over our objectives and then we'll dive into what are the foundations. There are several different domains within the foundations, so we'll show you those and open some of them up and take a look at them, and then we'll get into some practical application and have some time for reflection and questions.
Okay, so Nicole and I have been doing a lot of really important work around joy. And in all education, but especially with our littlest learners, they're not going to learn anything if they aren't feeling joyful, if they aren't feeling connected, if it's not feeling engaged. And so we like to start all of our presentations with a little bit of joy, just to remind us that our joy is contagious and also our grumpiness can be contagious as well. And so we're diving into joy. We also hope that you walk away with just a reminder that in all of your work, joy is relevant. You don't have to make joy relevant. It is. It is relevant to be joyful as an educator. And so we hope that you will take time to sit in joy and find moments of joy and reminders that that doesn't have to be like spending $300 on a spa day, although I highly recommend that as well, on all of our really fancy educator salaries.
Okay, so we're going to jump in now. These are our objectives today. We hope everybody can walk away with an understanding of the structure and the purpose of the foundations and how they support child development. Also to identify the key developmental domains addressed in the foundations. And then we're going to end with writing an IEP goal that are related to the foundations as well.
Okay,
Okay, so what are the foundations?
I'm gonna put
As
them in the link in the
we're going
chat.
to add a link to them in the chat so that you can get access to them really easily. But as Heather already mentioned, they were revised this past summer. And really, they're there to give us a lens into understanding our students' development, where they're coming from, where they're going. There's two different categories, and we will show you these as we jump in to look at them. The first category is for 3 to 4.5-year-olds. So that really goes from preschool into their TK year. And then the second category is, I think it's 4 to 5.5.
Yes.
So that will go from TK into kindergarten. They are part of that greater PK through 3 alignment work that we are learning more about and expanding into.
Yeah. And just a reminder that for those of you that aren't familiar, the PK through 3 alignment work is really looking at what does it mean to see our students from preschool age to third grade as early learners. I think in a lot of our districts, we have treated early learners as like exclusively TK and kindergarten. And we're not remembering that our kids are still developing always, right? But especially in these early years, they are characterized in terms of brain science as early learners. And especially for those of us that serve students along the developmental spectrum, some of this information is going to be really valuable for us, even if we have older students, because like we know, foundations and our a range and development is a range. And so I would say that our biggest work in our district has been helping shift mindset around the fact that in order for our students to be successful, we must have developmentally appropriate work and expectations. And these learning foundations are a really great tool for shifting why that is. And so we hope that we equip you with everything you need to be able to then use that tool. And I think keeping in mind that while these learning foundations are focused on our preschool through early kindergarten students, they are part of this greater picture of really rethinking what is developmentally appropriate and recognizing that like perhaps we haven't always been doing developmentally appropriate work and that there's a reason why in many European countries students aren't taught to read until they're 7 or 8 years old, and what does it look like in terms of student success and belonging and happiness and SEL, social emotional learning and ready to learn skills if we really take this early learning window and provide direct instruction and focus around what it means to be a learner and part of a community versus focusing on getting kids ahead academically. Okay, so here's what we know about our early learners. Nicole and I could not love 4-year-olds more. We both spent many, 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 many years, decades combined, in classrooms that primarily served 4-year-olds. And we think they're magical. And I think, again, in the interest of finding joy, we just want to remember, where do they thrive? So they are authentic and honest. They will tell you, Miss Heather, wow, that's a purple dress that looks weird. Miss Nicole.
Why does your hair look like that?
Um, they are going to tell you what it is. They're going to tell you, I feel sad. They're going to say, I feel grumpy. They're going to say all the things. You don't have to guess. And it's amazing. They are enthusiastic. My favorite story about 4-year-olds is that we have 186 school days. And every school day, I took my students out to the playground twice a day. And all it took for them to be thrilled about that, even on day 185 of the school year, was to say, friends, it's time to go to the playground. And then everyone is vibrating and dancing and they're so excited. And I'm like, we have spent so many hours on this playground. We were just there 30 minutes ago. But they are just so excited about life and enthusiastic. They are connected to their emotions and their feelings. It's on their face all the time. They are creative and imaginative. The way that they look at the world, when you give them freedom to do their artwork, when you let them cross, I'm so sorry to teachers that might freak out about this, but when you let them bring their plastic dinosaurs into the block area and have their dinosaurs knock over the block towers, it's like the most joyful thing of their life. And then I think they're just so curious. They want to know everything. One of my saving graces in my life right now is a podcast called But Why, a podcast for curious kids. I have a newly turned 6-year-old, and he asks 8,000 questions a day. And there was actually a really interesting study that someone shared with me that at 4 or 5, kids were asking hundreds of questions in the school day, and they were going to track how that changed over time. And I think when they went to do follow-ups in second or third or fourth grade, they couldn't even do a follow-up because the students were down to under 10 questions per day. So it's pretty magical that they want to know everything. Where do they need support? So anywhere on these slides that you see these numbers are indicators of a very specific learning foundation so that you're able to reference what they're tied to later. They need support with emotional regulation. If you walk away with nothing else from this whole presentation, we want you to walk away with the idea that self-regulation is not a thing for our early learners. It just isn't. We're really looking at co-regulation, and there's actually quite a bit of interesting research out there about the fact that adults don't actually self-regulate. We might show more self-control, but what helps us get to regulation is calling our best friend, getting a hug from our teacher friend down the hall, venting in a text message or a Marco Polo, writing someone a note. It is that communal experience of processing the things that are hard for you that allow you to regulate. And so we really are looking at teaching kids to co-regulate, which means that they are able to take their cues from us, that with guidance, they're able to recognize that they're feeling a certain way and it's impacting their behavior and their body, and that we're going to walk them through that. They also need support navigating conflict, the language, the regulation, the tools. They need help problem solving. I think one of the most interesting things I ever heard is our kiddos who are 3 and 4 and even 5 years old, they don't have long-term memory from far back away. And so if you have to leave the park, it takes a lot of times of us going and coming from the park before I believe that leaving the park doesn't mean I'm never going to get to come back. Or that when you put away that toy or make me give it to a friend, it doesn't mean I'm never going to get to use it again. And so, they need some help problem solving because it feels like this like devastating, horrible problem to them, right? And so we want to walk them through that. And then perspective taking, understanding that people have different thoughts and feelings than they do. And this is really our foundation to teaching them compassion, which I would argue is probably our most important job as early childhood educators. Okay, so this is a slide that we hold near and dear to our hearts. And we want to first be very transparent and say that these were things in the classroom that we sat with differently. We felt frustrated when our students couldn't do these things. And these were things that we were constantly trying to solve in our students. But as we say every day, when we know better, we do better. And hopefully, as educators, we're just constantly moving towards doing better. And so we just want to remind you again, these are all of the different learning foundations that are tied to these areas. It is developmentally appropriate for early learners to struggle with transitioning. It is going to be hard for all the kids some of the time, and for some of the kids, all of the time. Following instructions, especially multi-step directions, waiting their turn, again, that impulse control. Remember and following the rules, especially if the rules are not the same in all of their environments. Not blurting out. And for up until this point, for their whole lives, we've been like, tell us what you think, say the words. And now all of a sudden we're like, wait, keep your mouth. Yeah, raise your hand. Not touching their friends, sharing, communicating, especially when they're not regulated. It's really, really important to know that our students, even our students that have exceptional expressive and receptive language, have difficulty accessing it when they're frustrated. Think about when you are in a huge argument with someone, maybe your partner, maybe a friend, maybe a colleague, and you just are losing it. Some people are going to be crying instead of talking. Some people are going to be grunting instead of talking. Some people are going to talk and then afterwards play the whole thing again in their head and think to themselves, oh my gosh, I didn't say anything I meant. Here's all the things I should have said. This is really true for our kids too. Completing tasks, especially ones that they're not interested in. And just a friendly plug here, there's nothing interesting about worksheets for children under the age of 5. I don't know that worksheets are interesting for anyone, but they're certainly not interesting for 3 and 4-year-olds. Sitting still or staying in one place for extended amounts of time and being flexible. These are things that all of our students are going to struggle with. We frequently have educators say, oh, this student blurts and wiggles, and so we need them to be assessed. They need an IEP. They need to be out of this classroom. And we're like, well, actually, this is something that all of our kids go through. And they're learning, and it's developmentally appropriate for them to be exploring it. It is with the failure and the struggle that they're able to learn and build on these skills. And then the other thing that we'll add is that these skills are not linear. So as they make big gains in one area, you're gonna see regression in others. So, for example, I'm sure most of you have heard like people talk about spring fever in our classrooms. In our kindergarten classrooms, this is especially big, and typically it correlates with students becoming more independent readers, and now all of a sudden their like behaviors are off the chart. And I think this is where we really want to remember that their brains are growing at an exponential rate. And so when they're learning all these other new things, this old learning kind of gets pushed to the side, and they need to be retaught it, and they need to learn how to do it with this new version of their brain. And it's okay for us to repeat that and provide them with more opportunities to learn it. And I think it's really important to recognize that students struggling with these things are not a reflection of who they are or them being bad, which we hear a lot of, but really just them being 3, 4, 5, and 6 and learning how to operate within the world. Oh, can't talk anymore.
Okay. So when you go to the foundation link, you'll see all of the domains. We have them here. And if you are going to open the slide deck, each of these are a hyperlink to that domain. Oops, I didn't mean to click on it right away, but we'll dive into this one.
This is our favorite.
This is one of our favorites. So this domain is called Approaches to Learning. And I'll take you through the whole thing slowly, so I hopefully don't make anybody dizzy doing so. But each of the domains, when you open them, will have a table of contents, we'll have some introductory information. And then once you get past the introductory information, you'll get into the domains or the foundations themselves. So here's where we are going to start getting into that. There's kind of an overview on some of them when you get into a certain strand of what they're considering. This first one here is motivation to learn, so it'll talk to you a little bit about that. And then it'll show you what the first foundation is, give you a description. Again, here are the two categories. We have the early category, which is again that 3 to 4.5-year-old, and then the later, which is 4 to 5.5. And in each of these, you'll have different examples to help you facilitate that understanding of what they're talking about and what that might look like in your classroom and with your students. So that'll go through different foundations, but the one thing I did want to show you that I love is in a lot of these domains, there are little tips following the different foundations of how you can actually practically facilitate developing these areas in the classroom. So here they're talking about supporting curious learners, and they're going to give you some really great tips of how you can do that in the classroom. So these are kind of some of my favorite pages when you're looking through each of the domains. I think we should go back so we can cover what all of the domains are, and then maybe we'll click into another one to give you another look, since I didn't mean to click in that quickly. So here they all are. Approaches to Learning was the one we just went into. There's also social emotional development, foundational language development, English language development, mathematics, science, physical development, health, history, and visual and performing arts. So which one do you want to go into?
Let's do SEL. So our 3 favorites are approaches to learning, which is really those ready to learn, regulation, some regulation, and executive functioning skills, social emotional development, and the foundational language development. Without those, none of the rest of them are possible, right? You have to make sure that kids have all of these things so that they can access this other learning. Okay, so social emotional. So again, there's the age levels and the strands. we really like the introduction. It's worth reading. It talks about how to use them. It talks about what the strands and substrands are for, um, what the statements mean, the age levels. This is really nice to use with families, especially if you've ever had a 4 or 5 year old family asking you to please teach your child to read and do long division instead of giving them space and time to play. They have things specifically about multilingual learners. They typically touch on students with disabilities. They talk about the diversity in those skills based on cultural norms, again, children with disabilities. There's typically this trauma and trauma-informed supports in each of those sections, and then how we can support it. And this is really great for sharing with paraprofessionals, parents, and anyone else that's supporting your campus. Okay, and then there's like always really great resources here and how this is seeped and rooted in research, which is helpful um, for especially for parents often. So I think for me, the thing that I really want to dive into is, sorry, I don't want to make you dizzy. I'm looking for the adult support ones. Here we go. Um, okay, so this is Foundation 1.4, and it's regulating emotions, behavior, and stress. Just like give a little wave of your fingers or type yes in the chat if you have ever seen or written a goal that talks about a student by the end of kindergarten being able to self-regulate by choosing a tool and returning to the group. If you could just put a yes in the box if you've written a goal, if you've seen a goal. I say this as someone that wrote many of these goals. Turns out those goals are just not developmentally appropriate, so no wonder they weren't meeting them. It wasn't you. It wasn't you. From 3 to 4.5, what we're looking for is a child to make efforts to regulate their emotions and behaviors and cope with stress with adult support. So they'll accept a teacher's comfort when distressed and they'll eventually calm down, right? This is up to 4.5 years old. We just want them to accept that we're there to help support them. And then from 4 to 5.5, so again, this takes us up until most students are in kindergarten, where we want them to demonstrate strategies to cope with emotions and behaviors caused by stress with some adult support. So like a little less than when they were 3 to 4.5, but still explicitly stating that there is adult support needed. And this pretty much rings true throughout all of the foundations, that none of these skills we're looking for students to have independently by the end of 5.5 years old. And that mindset shift is huge, right? And it's not that we're trying to make them prompt dependent or person dependent, but we're recognizing that human development tells us that little learners, the way that they learn is by doing it alongside an adult who's modeling it and helping them move through it, especially when they're not feeling emotionally regulated. Do you want to add anything on this, Lynn?
No. I love that reminder. Again, there's going to be some guidance for teachers. I love this section after each foundation. So again, worth taking a look at here. Okay, let's go into maybe one other. Will you help me get back to?
Yes, I will. Which one do you want to go to? Does anyone have a request? Whoever types one in the box first will, of which of these foundations that you would like us to pull up for a little tour. We already did approaches to learning and social emotional development. So we had history first. That's interesting. Let's do that one.
Alrighty. So again, each of these you're going to see kind of that same structure. There's that table of contents. Again, all of that amazing introductory information that Heather shared that's so helpful to actually spend a little bit of time going over. Again, age levels.
Some of the information repeats itself in each of that beginning section, but it's worth at least scanning because there's also things that are specific to that foundation in there about that piece.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. Someone just asked in the chat, would you mind sharing how an IEP goal can be used with the foundations? We're going to spend our whole last part of the session doing that together. So absolutely.
Mhm. And then again, we're going to get into the different strands. So here's the first strand. It'll give you kind of an overview. Foundation 1.1, making observations and asking questions. So again, you're going to have those two different sections and all the wonderful examples on what that can practically look like with your students.
And I think something really important to notice about these foundations is that they're a lot about exploration and learning through play and not about concrete products. So you're not going to see something that says that a child is going to write their name within a 3-inch margin. You're not going to see something that says like a child is going to retell a story about what happened in history. We're looking for something like this, creating representation. So they're doing drawings or blocks to do something that they saw in the community. They
Adult support.
and again, there's with adult support on both of those, right? So you're asking questions. This says a child working alongside other children uses cereal boxes to create a model of a street they saw on a community walk. The children show and describe their model to their families at a class celebration, right? So these are all ideas and examples, but it's really important to make the distinction between oh my gosh, my brain is just what in upper grades they have standards. There we go. The distinction between standards and learning foundation. And a standard is something that we want students to achieve by a particular time. And it usually looks like a pretty inflexible outcome.
Specific.
We are working, obviously, in education to broaden that, but they're typically something that can be measured on a formal assessment or in a standardized way. That's not what learning foundations are. They're exploring all of the different ways that a child is going to interact with the world and what that might look like and ways that you can facilitate it as an educator.
Okay.
There we go.
One of the questions in the chat was around anything related to English learners. If you guys had any.
Yeah, they have a multilingual learner section in each of the foundational overviews to talk about the framework for looking at it that way.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into some practical application. And this is going to relate to that question about IEP goals. So we're going to take an opportunity to practice thinking about a student that you have or have had in the past. Open up the foundations and look over a corresponding domain, and then use that to help you write a goal. First, we'll go over a couple examples, and then we'll come back to this page for you to reference when you're getting your chance to do it. So here's just a couple examples that we have. So when we're thinking about areas of need for our students, like play, really what we're doing is when we're writing those goals, we are attaching the foundation that it's relating to. So here under Social Emotional Foundation 1.7, we wrote a goal for a student to play with a variety of play themes and participate by acting out a variety of actions within a 10-minute period with at least 1 to 2 peers, and then having 3 to 4 verbal or nonverbal exchanges with that peer. So really it's just we're trying to link the foundation to the goal itself to show what we're targeting and what we're working towards. Another example under Language and Literacy Foundation 2.4, by annual review, the student will be able to both receptively and expressively identify the letters of their name on 4 to 5 opportunities.
Yeah. So some of this is going to be rethinking and just finding goals that you have found meaningful and useful and valuable for your students. in the context of the foundations, some of this is going to be like, whoops, that goal wasn't appropriate. I need to rethink it. And some of it's going to be like, oh, wow, this isn't an area of need I've thought about before. And so I need to write a goal for it. I would say, generally speaking, for our preschool students, our academic areas of the foundations should be guiding what is happening in classroom practice, but not necessarily guiding IEP goals. So things like the history section or the science section. Our students can't have enough of a delay in those areas yet for them to be an area of deficit because they're really just being introduced in early learning. And so the learning foundations are about showing us how we can introduce them in a classroom, how we can help our students explore and do those pieces. So those are great things to look at in terms of making sure that our classrooms and our activities and our instructional plans are developmentally appropriate and are incorporating all of these areas. But for goals, primarily, I would say you're going to be looking at the first three sections and also the language and literacy foundation. Okay, so I'm going to come back here. We're going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to pull up some learning foundations and think about a student, one of your early learning students, and write a goal. And we would love for those to be shared in the chat. Please go ahead and change your student's name or block out your student's name. But we want to give folks an opportunity to hear and see goals written by a variety of people using the same tool. So we'll be available and on the chat if you have questions, but go ahead and click in the box on the Learning Foundations link and use it as a chance to check out a learning foundation that you're curious about or write a goal that's coming up for an IEP. This can be productive and fun and learning.
And when you write your goal in the chat, if you could just also write which foundation that it corresponds to. All right, so we have a few minutes.
As goals come in, we're going to read them out loud. Oh, and yes, they asked us to restate the domains. So approaches to learning, social emotional development, foundational language development, and then I think for some of our students, English language development and mathematics could have some pieces for sure. But these first three, I would say, are going to be our primary focus, and then the next two could vary by student. Come back to this. So we have our first goal, which is given a model and demonstration by a teacher, the student will improve imitation and participation skills by imitating fine and gross motor movements during large group activities and songs. That's a great one.
Yeah, I love how you included given a model in that teacher demonstration piece.
Yep. And I love that it's the fine and gross motor, giving our students kind of the freedom to dive into their strengths. All right. Another one is given visual cues and adult modeling, the student will begin a familiar classroom activity within 2 minutes of a prompt and 4 out of 5 opportunities across 3 weeks as measured by staff data collection. That's a great goal. I love the visual cues and the adult modeling. Will you respond to that one, Jennifer, with which foundation it ties to? All right, we have a mathematics one for the counting and cardinality. Given manipulatives, visuals, and AAC and a model prompt, the student will count up to 5 objects using one-to-one correspondence. I love all the options of supports that are embedded in there. That's fantastic.
All right, here's another one. By a given date, given access to appropriate assistive technology, student will independently participate in messy art activity or sensory motor activity for 5 minutes. Oh, I love that. And it goes with the Foundation 1.1 curiosity and interest. That's a super fun one. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that one. When given a verbal or visual prompt, a student will copy or imitate a vertical line, horizontal line, and circle with 80% accuracy over 4 trials days as measured by teacher and staff observation and data collection. Yep. And I love that we're talking about copying or imitating, and we're talking about those really basic foundational strokes. So the line, the circle, right? Like that's what we're starting with. We're not asking our friend Penelope to write her whole name using upper and lowercase letters when she is 3 years old.
Okay. Given pictures or objects, students will independently use commonly experienced vocabulary like animals, food, or toys to describe categories with 75% accuracy. And that corresponds to
Probably language development.
language development at 1.2. And here's one more, interactions with peers by annual review and with adult support, love that. To redirect focus and attention, they will actively and intentionally engage with peers, modeling peers' actions during a cooperative play activity, like Lego building activity. I love that. You have the adult support again in there, and that they will engage with their peers, and you put in an example of modeling the peers' actions or imitating them. That looks great.
And another really nice thing about using the foundations is that I don't know how many of you use SACE, but when you click, like, is this goal an academic area or some other area related to their disability? In preschool, we tend to live in that checkbox, but this allows us to tie it back to really intentional outcomes, which also for those families or teachers that tend to sit in a much more academic focus, it is another tool for us to justify why needs to be a key part of our instruction and focus, not just for individual students, but for our classroom instruction as a whole. We in our district have a shared Google Doc where preschool teachers are sharing these goals. We did another one for TK case managers as well. I encourage you in your district or with other like-minded folks to start something like that as a good jumping off place, because, we all can get into our rut of recycling the same things, and this allows us an opportunity to think outside of the box.
All right, so we are coming to the end of our time, but before we close out, we want some time for reflection. So we have a few questions here, and again, you can just put your thoughts in the chat and we'll read some of them out loud. But we want you to reflect on how has your understanding of the foundations changed or deepened based on today's training? Oops. What areas of the foundations do you feel most confident in using? And maybe which one feels less familiar? And given that, like, what are your next best steps in becoming more familiar with that domain? What is one change you can make in your classroom tomorrow
Or your practice.
for your practice? Using something you learned today about the foundations. We always like to think about how we can take what we've learned and apply it when we step back into our space or our classroom the next day. And also, how might using the foundation support inclusive practices in your classroom, on your campus, or in your district? So if you have any thoughts as you're reflecting, feel free to add them to the chat.
Nicole and I just started attending conferences in the last year or two and have found that we feel so excited and equipped, and then it all kind of bubbles out when we get back to work. And so we've been trying to be really intentional when we present to carve out explicit time in our sessions for participants to have something that they can walk away with. And so we hope that these questions, even if you don't share in the chat, we would love to hear them, obviously, but that you take a few minutes to at least think through them, especially something that involves a next step, so that this feels very functional for you. Sarah shared that she's going to share these with preschool and TK teachers that she coaches, and she wants to read and skim through them to be able to better recommend to teachers and parents. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing, if you are going to share them, if you do have opportunities to coach people or to just get in meetings with people, I think the best way to really learn about them is to give everybody that chance to open them up, to talk about them, to read them. Because I think it's one thing to just try to skim them over yourself, but when you're really engaged in that with a group of people, it can be really helpful to have them start sinking in and build in that understanding.
We've done several trainings where we break teachers up into groups and they dive into a particular domain and either come up with goals or activities related to those, some of them using our curriculum. And so that's really helpful.
Yep. Somebody said they're going to start referencing the foundations when they're writing their IEP to help better support the student. I think that's a great idea, just to pull them up and to reference them as you're going through present levels or IEP goals.
We have used this as a resource for helping teachers write developmentally appropriate goals. And then consistency between teachers and sites. And I think this is like something that early childhood educators have been desperate for a long time, right? So often we don't have a shared curriculum, we don't have shared language, and this is really a beginning jumping off point for us to be able to do that, not just across schools and sites and classrooms, but statewide, which I think is really valuable and important. Oh, I like this one. So many teachers complain about behaviors, but some of this is just normal kid stuff, right? And it is like, this is how kids sit in the world and how they learn about the world. Feel free to pop more questions in or email us, but we also want to pull this up here. We have our agenda right over here and then the survey for the session. You can click on the links in the presentation that you open from the chat, or you can scan the QR code. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm and involvement, and most of all, for your care and commitment to our youngest learners. I know that oftentimes it feels like not a place that people are focused on, but we know that what we do for our students in their first several years of school lays the foundation for how they're going to show up in school moving forward.
Yes.